look, we have to make provision for the fact that I shall probably go to jail. As it happened, you didn't.
It was close. Very close.
Was it close? I mean, do you now know that it was close?
Oh, I know it was. I mean, I was designated by the prosecuting attorney as the next person to be put on trial. It was just that when the Tet Offensive took place, and the Tet Offensive ended the prosecutions because
so disastrous.
Power, well, you know, American power decided this war isn't worth it anymore. You know, let's wind it down. And at that point, the prosecution stopped. Actually, the person who was carrying out the prosecution was Ramsey Clark. He was Attorney General. Yeah. And he himself shifted way over to the other side.
Of course.
And in fact, what happened around here is kind of comical. I wrote a book once in which I compared the before and after records of memoirists and so on. Arthur Schlesinger, Theodore Sorensen, you know. I mean, after Tet, they gave a picture of what had happened that's radically different from what they were describing at the time. And you can get away with that in a disciplined society like ours because we know that that's the thing it just wouldn't do to say, you know. But the Tet
What did Gramsci call them? Paid apologists of the status quo, like me.
Exactly, yeah. and I'm sure that's internalized. Like they don't think they're doing anything different because it is very easy to...
But you didn't. I mean, have you just always been against things? Is that it?
I mean, in this country, you could count on the fingers of one hand the number of people who agree with me about the Vietnam War.
Even now?
Now. I mean...
but surely you've been proved right by what happened there.
Well, what they say is proven right is what I think is horrendous. Take a look at, say, McNamara's memoirs.
Yeah.
I thought they were outrageous. The peace movement was praising them because he finally came around to our side. What did he come around to? What he came around to is saying that he apologizes to the American people, not to the Vietnamese. Well, he killed 5 million people in Indochina, but that's of no interest. Apology to the American people because it cost us too much. We disrupted American society. We should have understood earlier that it wasn't going to work, meaning if it would have worked, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
So Saddam Hussein was fine, except that he made a mistake. You know, it didn't work. And in fact, the major issue in my mind was always the U.S. war against South Vietnam.
Yeah.
That is not in history. So if you look at McNamara's memoirs, which are typical, he does not even mention the 2 major decisions he was involved in. The first one was organizing the bombing of South Vietnam in 1961. The second was radically escalating it in January 1965. Not even mentioned. I mean, even in February 65, when they started bombing the North, the South was being bombed at triple the intensity at that point. Now, why all the attention to the bombing of the North and not the bombing of the South, or the war against us?
Because it's easier to see the enemy on the other side, wouldn't it?
No, I don't think so. It's because the U.S. war in the South was cheap. The enemy couldn't retaliate. I mean, there's peasants in the Mekong Delta. There's nothing they can do to us. The bombing of the North was costly. When you bomb the North, you're bombing a state. There are embassies there. Other countries don't like it. You're bombing a Chinese railroad, which happens to run through northern Vietnam. You're hitting Russian ships in the Haiphong harbor. You're hitting people who could cost you something. When you're attacking the South, you're hitting totally defenseless people. So therefore, that's out of history. Corporations altogether are a form of tyranny, which is radically opposed to classical liberalism.
Yeah.
And in fact, when the corporatization of society took place early in this century, it was bitterly attacked by conservatives who described it as a form of communism. And remember, it was instituted by courts. You can't find it in the Constitution.
No.
I mean, the modern corporation became a tyrannical structure on the basis of neo-Hegelian ideas, which are not unlike those that led to Bolshevism and fascism.
Yeah.
You know, that organic entities have rights over and above individuals, and that the top directors are the entity.
Yeah, and there's a corporate person which has the rights to protection.
Which is immortal. New treaties, which are being designed in secret, because the OECD countries know everybody's going to hate them, and the media keep them quiet because they know nobody's going to like them, like multilateral agreement on investment. Those treaties actually provide these tyrannies with the rights of states, not just persons. There are always new forms of domination and authority being constructed, but there's no reason to accept them.
But if your general theory of humanity is right, that there is the instinct for freedom, that fundamentally we are generative organs, why is it that, what did Hume say, that the few seem to dominate the many? I got the quote here somewhere. It's wonderful. To see the easiness with which the many are governed by the few.
Notice how he says we do it.
Yeah.
He says we have to control people's minds.
That's right. To observe the implicit submission with which men resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers. Now, but why does that happen?
Basically, he says you have to do it through what we would call propaganda.
Yeah.
And as Hume, I agree with Hume's observation with one proviso. He says that this is true of all societies, from the most militaristic and, tyrannical to the most free. And there, I think, a qualification is necessary. It's much less true in tyrannical systems. When the state has force at its command, they don't really care much what you think. So you take, say, Russia in the 1970s. I mean, if you can believe American studies, about 75% of the population was getting their information from the BBC.
Sure.
And samizdat, underground papers reaching, maybe half the educated population. I mean, it was illegal, but they don't really care. You can always throw people into the prison camp. On the other hand, when societies become more free, it becomes much more important to control their minds. It's perfectly natural that in the United States, which is maybe the most free country in the world, there is by far the most commitment to propaganda. I mean, the public relations industry is a U.S. invention. A huge effort goes into trying to divert people, to prevent them from seeing what's in front of them, just pure secrecy or plain lying, because you have to control minds. My success comes from, this quote, is from my ability to embrace and expand the ideas of others. Bill Gates, and there's a parasite.
Yeah.
All he has to add to that is that he's a parasite off the public sector.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, almost everything that he does, whether it's computers or the Internet or anything else, is things that the ordinary person paid for. Take the Internet. I mean, that's 30 years of development inside the public sector, mostly out of the Pentagon. All the ideas, the technology, the hardware, the software, everything. Finally, just 2 or 3 years ago, it's given over to Bill Gates.
Yeah.
And that's called a victory of the market.
Let's look at the minds of the people who are doing the controlling. How do they see themselves? How do they fool themselves?
Very noble. I mean, there's no person so saintly that they haven't done bad things. Like maybe when you were 8 years old, you stole a toy from your little brother because nobody was looking, whatever. Now simply ask yourself, how do you picture such things to yourself? Does the 8-year-old say, well, I want the toy and I'm bigger than he is and nobody's looking, so I'll take it? No. What the 8-year-old says is, well, look, he doesn't really have any right to it, and it's really mine, and I can use it better than he can, and he's got a lot of other things, so it's really right for me to take it. That's the way human beings are. You have commitments.
Why aren't you that way? Why do you see it?
I don't think anybody is like that in a deep sense. It's a way it's easy to become, and under certain conditions, you can become that. But deep in human nature is the understanding that this is all wrong, and we can.
So the instinct for freedom is there, even in the corporate boardrooms. They know that they're doing something.
And in fact, that's why they live under such forms of self-delusion. The self-delusion is extremely important. I mean, that's what places like Harvard and Yale and Oxford and Cambridge are about. Actually, Orwell wrote about this rather nicely in his article on literary censorship in England, which was supposed to be the preface to Animal Farm. He talks about how, okay, we can make fun of Russia, but we're not so free to do it. And he doesn't say much about it, but he has a couple of sentences which really hit it on target. He says, unpopular opinions can be marginalized so that they don't exist even under freedom. And the way it's done is, he says, the press is owned by wealthy men who have every reason not to have certain ideas expressed. And if you have a good education, you get to understand that there are certain things it just wouldn't do to say, or for that matter, wouldn't do to think. As soon as you begin to investigate children learning language, it turns out that they have an incredible amount of knowledge before they're producing anything. In fact, 4-day-old children are already distinguishing their mother's language from other languages.
Exactly.
And take the sentence, the chicken is ready to eat. Okay, it's ambiguous. I mean, the chicken's sitting there about to eat, or, chicken's prepared. All right, now change it a little. The chicken is ready to be eaten. Okay, well, it's still ambiguous. So it can mean the chicken is facing his master, his God or something. Man's ready for execution. The chicken is ready to be eaten. He's prepared. Or it could mean the chicken is cooked. Ready. Now, if you think about it, that's a different ambiguity. It's ambiguous, but a different ambiguity. All right, suppose you change the word ready to, let's say, hard. The chicken is hard to eat. Okay, now it doesn't have the ambiguity at all. It has just one meaning. make the second change. The chicken is hard to be eaten. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So here, slight changes in one adjective and another go from one ambiguity to another ambiguity to no ambiguity to nothing.
No sense.
Now, how does everybody knows that? Children never make mistakes about that. You can't find it in a grammar. It's not explained in a grammar book. And in fact, to figure out why it's happening is not so trivial. But it's the kind of information about extremely simple expressions that everyone knows, and everyone knows about instruction, and everyone knows very early on. I mean, now that experimental work has been done, it turns out as soon as you can experiment, everybody knows it. Well, there's hundreds of examples like this, and looking at them, you make a very powerful case that this has all got to be coming from the inside. Now, since we know perfectly well that no one is genetically designed to speak English and not Swahili, it's got to be a common human possession. Right. Any child can learn any language, which means all languages must have those same principles. And from the point of view of a Martian, they must look like minor variations. All of this becomes instantly obvious as soon as you begin to think about the phenomena.